You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor Podcast, episode 77, and I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones. At the time we are recording this, music educators are faced with a true crisis, something unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes, and we are facing decisions we wouldn't wish on anyone. I think many of us hoped that by the time the school year was going to start up again, all nice and back to normal it would be, this whole pandemic thing was going to pass sometime in May, and we'd be back in our classrooms with our students and reconnecting with them as usual. Sure, there might be a second wave of pandemic, but not until later in the fall. Plenty of time for us to build back the relationships with our students and plan for another temporary shutdown. Unfortunately, that is not the case. What we're looking at now is potential for semi-permanent closures, or maybe 2 days a week with tiny class sizes, or maybe 6 feet apart. Oh, except for trombone, who will need 12 feet. And that's just in the classroom. How do we keep them from singing? How do we keep them from playing? How do we keep them apart in the hallways, from their friends at home, at recess and lunch? If there isn't a way to ensure everyone's safety, should we even be trying to go back? What if it's our health that's at risk? How can we choose between our own wellness or the career that we love? Is there any right choice here? I maintain that we as music educators are absolutely capable, adaptable, and just able to handle whatever is thrown at us. And today I bring in one of the hands-down authorities in this whole new world, one of the most influential people in music education, and one of the nicest people I've ever had the privilege to meet. He's going to help guide us in this time of uncertainty, and his name is Bob Morrison. He's the CEO of Quadrant Research, but as you'll hear, he has a robust background in music, education, and business that he brings to the table to help arts advocates around the country. He's going to join me for this conversation where we talk about the future, about the work that's being done now to collect the data so we can make smart decisions for us and our students. If you want to know what the future of music education should be and will be, this is the episode for you. But first, a huge shout out to Smart Music for making this episode happen. If you're looking for even more incredibly relevant content to help you in this time of transition, you need to check out the Smart Music blog. They have a post right now that is so good. I added it to the episode show notes so you'd be sure not to miss it. It's all about creating a risk management plan, which may be something new to us as music educators, but is standard fare in the business world. So go to smartmusic.com/blog and search for episode 77, and you'll find all the links for this episode. And if you are in the situation where you'll be needing a 1-to-1 instrument ratio, you should look into the Conn-Selmer Stimulus Program. Conn-Selmer is the authority in band and orchestra instruments and have set aside $1 million to help you get the support you need for your instrumental music program. To learn more about the stimulus, go to education.conn-selmer.com. Now, without further ado, here's Bob and I attempting to predict the future of music education.
My name is Bob Morrison, and I am the CEO of Quadrant Research and the Director of Arts Ed New Jersey.
Well, that's a very short title. But you do so much more. Will you tell us a little bit about how did you get into this role in New Jersey Arts Ed, and how did you get into your business?
Well, I started going to school to be a music teacher. I was going to be a music educator. And then I got sidetracked into writing and performing. And then that led to me being recruited to go into the music products industry. So I spent several years with the Pearl Drum Company, helping them build up their educational division, and was then recruited from them to go to work at NAMM to oversee market development and what was at that point in time their National Commission for Music Education. So I got really involved in advocacy when I was at Pearl in Tennessee in the late 80s because of a lot of the national challenges that we faced in music and arts education. And that then led me down the pathway to, working at NAMM. We worked to help create the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation after we worked on the movie with Michael Kamen and Richard Dreyfuss. And then from that, VH1 recruited me to help them with an idea that their CEO had regarding this Save the Music Foundation that he had the idea for. And so he recruited me to leave NAMM to come to work for him and build out the plan and then lead Save the Music for the first 6 years of existence. And by that point in time, I'd done a lot of building for other people. So I decided I wanted to build something for myself. So in the early 2000s, I think it was 2003, I started an organization called Music for All. And it was just going to be focused on advocacy and research and messaging. And over the couple of years that we got involved in the advocacy side of things, we also started getting involved in data. Because I was, even going back to my time at Pearl, I was always asking, well, how many kids are in music? How many music teachers are there? How many schools have programs? How many schools don't have programs? And that has always stayed with me. And when I was at Save the Music, we actually started requiring that of the school districts that we worked in, that they needed to have an accountability in place of where programs were, where they weren't, who had access, who didn't, so that we could build out plans to restore their programs. So when I created Music for All, data was a big part of it. And we actually started to gather data, and we did a report for the state of California in 2004 that was called The Sound of Silence, the Unprecedented Decline in Music Education in California's Public Schools, because we were able to track a 50% decline in student participation over a 5-year period, which really set off alarm bells for me and also the folks in California, but it also showed me the power that data had to actually lead to policy changes. So in 2006, we merged Music for All with Bands of America, and which is now the entity that it still exists. And while we were building that out, I was still being pulled on the data side, still wanted to see how we could use data as an advocacy tool to increase access to programs. So after being involved with the merged organization for 3 years, I set out and created Quadrant Research. And through Quadrant Research, we've got the National Arts Education Data Project, where we're quantifying access to and participation in all arts education in public schools in 20 states across the country right now. And while I was doing that, I was based here in New Jersey, so I got recruited to help them look at what was happening with arts education in New Jersey. And in 2006, we created Arts Ed New Jersey and have been using that as a little bit of an experiment, a place to experiment. We do a lot of experimentation with new ideas, new policies, work around SEL, work around data. And as a result, it's really helped inform some of the national work that we do, because we've actually had a way to pilot ideas and then take those ideas and shift them off nationally. So it's been a long and winding road, from being involved at first wanting to be a music educator, then trying my hand at performing, then being involved in the music products industry, then going into television of all things and being in the entertainment world for several years, and then running my own nonprofit and then starting my own research company. And, if someone had said when I was in college, hey, where are you going to be, 30, 40 years from now, this is not where I would have said I would be.
The work you're doing is so incredibly impactful, not only throughout your career, but so much right now as we're being faced with this monumental catastrophe in our culture. And you absolutely are put in the right place with the right background to make the biggest difference. And I appreciate all of the immense service that you're doing, the education that you're providing, the data that you're helping provide, because you're absolutely right. Data makes decisions.
No, absolutely. And, being a music educator is actually being an entrepreneur, because there are so many different aspects to music that you find yourself involved in. You're teaching, maybe you're writing, most are performing at the same time as well. Some get involved in teaching during the summer, doing other things or private lessons. And, you've got to have, a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. And that includes, understanding business and management and communication and all the things that come along with that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know that when I was getting my bachelor's in music education, I was given like half of a semester on all of that kind of stuff that ends up being 70% of our job or more. And it's the stuff that if we don't know it, we can't teach the music as well. I see it as, there's the pedagogy or the content and then the context, right? We're being trained really well in the content.
No, but I think one of the things that's interesting about that, think about how much time you spent on advocacy when you were in college, right? Probably little to none. And I think that one of the things that we do see is students coming out that are, good on the pedagogy, but not so good on, there's a people management aspect of this as well. And how do you get along with people, and how do you work as part of a team, and how do you build relationships and a network, and how do you communicate with your superiors, and how do you take the long view of developing relationships? Because a lot of people think when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh my God, we need to get our supporters behind us and help advocate for our programs. And I get the idea of wanting to react in that situation, but you're going to be in a much better position if you've been working with those people all along and developing those relationships. People asked us when I think it was in late April, we created our September Ready Task Force here in the state of New Jersey, and we have every single educational statewide association involved, from school boards and superintendents and the teachers union and the PTA, as well as all of the arts organizations. And they're like, how were you able to pull those people together so quickly? And it's because we've been working together for 15 years, And so I wasn't knocking on the door for the first time going, hi, I'm here from Arts Ed New Jersey, and we'd really like you to help us. It was, we've been working all along together, and we were able to just call on those relationships and go, hey guys, we really need you right now. Can you join up with us in this effort? And that effort has been incredibly important for the stability of our arts education programs here in New Jersey.
We've been talking about the word advocacy in music education for decades, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know that we have really thoroughly defined it. And, with a business acumen, we know it as public relations, right? Mm-hmm. It's really just, and if you dial it down to that next level, you're absolutely right. It's relationships. It's relationship management. And that's not something, we're told you need to advocate for your program, which, by the way, I think is not nearly as effective as having other people advocate for your program. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're not the music educator. It is not always the best person to be out front necessarily. So, message, it's one of the things I like to say, message is important, but so is the messenger, right? And you need to find out who the best messenger is at a given point. But I think along those lines, the other voice that's important is the student voice, because it's their programs and people respond to them. But the other thing is that oftentimes people think that advocacy is this thing. Okay, now I have to go do advocacy, right? And advocacy is really not something that you do. Advocacy is something that you are. It's got to be a natural part of how you conduct yourselves just in the course of the day, because every time you meet with an administrator or see a school board member or talk to a parent, those are educational moments. Those are advocacy moments. And advocacy isn't always about standing up and pounding on the table and demanding things. It can be as simple as just sharing with somebody a recent success in the program. And, it's just, it's the little bits that you're sharing consistently that build the support over the long term, instead of being silent and then all of a sudden jumping up and down and screaming. And there's a really good example of this. We had a situation in a large urban district here in New Jersey, where after investing in building up their music program, there was rumblings that they were going to cut 2 music positions. And the teachers union was all up in arms, and they're like, we're going to go to the school board and we're going to demand. And they were like, they had the pitchforks and the angry mob mentality, and they were all ready to go. And I talked to the music educators down there, and I said, you can't do that. You cannot do that. I said, if you want to make a statement, instead, bring some of your students, have them play at the board meeting, and get up and say thank you. Go to them and say, because this is possible, these students playing here, that's made possible because the investment that you've made in building up our music program. So we're just here to say thank you. The end result was they didn't cut the 2 positions, they added 2 positions. That would not have happened if they came in with the pitchforks.
No, you're absolutely right. Especially, and I'm not saying we shouldn't get emotionally up in arms, but the way that we act on that has to be in a way that doesn't allow people to just dismiss us outright. I've been thinking a lot about this because we do feel so enraged about injustice right now, but we can't fight injustice with more injustice. We can't fight anger with anger. Those things just compound. If we want to fight anger, we need to do it with whatever the opposite is.
Well, and also it's not a matter of, sometimes the decisions that they're making are not being made out of anger, and they're not being made with ill intent. Sometimes they may just be uninformed. And so they need to be educated and brought forward. I always tell everybody, I said, you can't go into a meeting until you understand what the underlying issue is. Why is it that they are proposing something that will have a negative impact on your program? Because 9 times out of 10, they're not doing it because that's the outcome that they want, right? It may be an unintended consequence. But if you assume the worst and go in there with guns blazing, then you'll probably find yourself in a worse position than if you would have really taken the time to understand what the issue is before you go on the offensive. And I always say, never shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. You have to really understand what it is that you're faced with before you go on the offensive. And I always tell folks that going in with the pitchforks and being angry and storming the gates is really the last option. That's really the nuclear option. That you save that for when you've lost the battle and it's your Hail Mary, right? That you're gonna come. And sometimes it works. Most of the time, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. I think we need to remember too, and tell me if I'm right in this assumption, that we're teachers. And it's if we go in with that mentality that these people are our students, we just need to teach them so that they see the light.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is that the people that you're talking to, particularly as it relates to board members, they're parents too. They're volunteers. They didn't run to be on the school board to hurt kids, right? That wasn't their MO. But you'd be amazed at how infrequently people show up at school board meetings to say thank you.
And that's powerfully impactful, to be able to say thank you. Mm-hmm. When you're kind to others, they want to be kind to you.
That's very true.
So, all right. I have another quick question. Speaking of decision makers, how much are teachers being looped in and students as these decisions for the fall are being made?
Well, I'm actually encouraged by what I'm hearing. I don't have any real hard data to say X% of school districts are engaging their teaching faculty or their arts administrators, but I'm hearing from a lot of people that say, "Hey, I'm on my team. Do you have any information?" Or I went and I talked to my administrators, and they're listening to us, and they want our feedback. So I'm actually hearing more and more of that is going on. Doesn't necessarily mean that every single teacher is invited to that, but from what I'm seeing, that music educators and arts educators do seem to have a seat at the table in many of the districts.
And what about the students?
The students probably, from what I've seen, that surveys have gone out to parents. I haven't seen a lot of surveys that have included students in that mix. I do know that in some of the places where programs have been threatened, that students' voice has made a difference. In places like Rhode Island and Massachusetts, where early on, because I think the contractual June 15th deadline, you started hearing about teachers being riffed. And as a result, students were coming out of the woodwork and putting out petitions and raising their voices. And I think that has made a difference in those situations. But I think as far as the everyday planning of what school is going to look like, I don't think that they've been engaged as much because of the three-dimensional chess structure of trying to figure out how we're going to reopen our schools.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the three-dimensional chess structure.
It is incredibly complex. I mean, I thought I knew how complex it was, 8 weeks ago, and it is magnified from what I know now to versus what I know then. I mean, there are so many moving pieces, and every decision has an impact, and sometimes that decision then has residual impacts in other areas that you haven't really thought about. And again, I think that even as we're in some parts of the country a few weeks away from opening our schools, I think there's still more questions than answers.
The decision-making data is changing all of the time. We keep getting new data and new information. There's nothing definitive because it just keeps changing. And I think music teachers feel so like our hands are tied. If we're not on one of these panels to help discuss and make the decisions for the future, what do you think we can be doing right now to prepare ourselves without knowing what the future is going to hold?
Well, I think it's it's really trying to take things into your own hands, right? So what is it that you can do yourself, right? And oftentimes, people get worried about the things that they don't have any influence or control over, or the decisions that are being made out there, or they're waiting for something that there's going to be something that comes down that will bring clarity to everything. And the reality is that there's really not going to be anything that comes down that brings clarity to everything. So what you can do is think about what is it that you can do now to prepare. And some of the things that they can do is, we know in most instances that there's going to be some sort of social distancing that occurs in our classrooms. So what does that mean in your classroom, in your music room? Do the math. What is the size of your room? And what does it look like if it's 3 feet of social distancing? What does it look like if it's 6 feet of social distancing? And get an idea of what it is that you may be possible for you when you have the ability to be in your room. And then think about some other things that, well, we know we shouldn't share instruments. We know we shouldn't share music. And we know, so what can you do to address some of those things in your classroom to make sure that you've thought through the implications of what does that mean? What does that mean if we can't share music? Okay, I'm going to have to maybe see how I can make additional copies of something and do so in a way that is appropriate to copyright law. What does it mean about not sharing stands? What does it mean about not sharing instruments. And we're not talking about not you can share instruments, but not mouthpieces. We're just not sharing instruments. And in the event where you have to, like big background instruments, all right? So what is the protocol that you need to do between the time that this one student used it and another student has to use it? What does it look like for percussion? How do they need to have their own sticks? Do they need to wear gloves? Do they need to be assigned to one percussion instrument? And there's a lot of great information out there that organizations have put out to help guide that. What about if you have practice rooms? What's your ventilation like in your practice rooms? Is it, are you getting good circulation through there? Will you need to maybe ask for improved circulation or a fan, or have the door open, or do you need to have the windows open in your classroom to help with the ventilation? Just practical, everyday things to think about that you have control over. And you don't have to wait for somebody to give you permission to figure these things out. And then you may sit there and go, my room's really not as big as I would like it to be. So then maybe you need to go meet with your administrator and say, well, since we can't have assemblies in the auditorium anymore, and there's more space in the auditorium than there is in my music room, can I have my students, can we rehearse in the auditorium? Can our choir rehearse in the seats in the auditorium? I'm seeing this in actually some colleges and high schools where the plans are that the choir students will actually be standing in the audience in appropriately socially distanced so that they can have A, the numbers, and then B, be able to rehearse. So these are things that teachers can do right now. And by the way, you've just had a 3-month trial run on teaching online. What worked for you? What didn't? And what that didn't work, do you want to carry forward in how you will operate in the fall? Particularly if you're in a hybrid environment, you're going to go, okay, these things worked really well, so I can bring that into a hybrid environment when my students are remote. But there's one thing that didn't work well at all, and that is we can't play together. And so you then have to prioritize, all right, what are the things that I will focus on when I'm together with my students versus the things that I can do and that they can do when we're not together. And I've been telling everyone and anyone that would listen, and it was one of the main themes in our report that we just released, is that when we are together, we have to create. We have to make music, we have to create theater, we have to create great works of art, we have to do our dance collaborations. We can only do those things together. And by the way, that's the thing that our students miss the most. So when we're together, create music, make music, play. And I don't care whether it's 2 or 4 or 6 or 12 or 60, find a way to play together, and then you can figure out the rest of this stuff virtually.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. And fortunately, all of our composer friends have started to really make this push toward chamber music and alternative ensembles, flex ensembles.
Yeah, I think that the composers in particular, as part of that consortium, have really done some incredible work. And I know that Robert Ambrose and Alex Shapiro and all of her friends have really done a bang up job with their collaborative initiative to really come up with new ways to address this environment. What do you do if you've got an unusual collection of students, of instrumentalists in front of you, because you don't have any real say over who's going to be in your room at any given time? So I've got 2 clarinets, a trombone, and a snare drummer. What do I do? And the great thing is that we've had some of the brightest minds in our composer world thinking about this and coming up with ways that you can make music regardless of the configuration of your class.
So onto a personal side, what can we be doing in our personal development to prepare ourselves for the challenges ahead?
Well, I think a lot of that, first of all, as a music educator, you're not going to be effective unless you're taking care of yourself. And I think that, first and foremost, we talk a lot about social emotional learning as it relates to our students and how that has got to be a priority, but it's got to be a priority for our faculty and staff as well. We talk about the trauma that our students have been through. Well, some of our educators have been through trauma as well. It was a traumatic experience, right? Watching, having to convert from, hey, you're in school, now you're teaching remotely, but it's only going to be a little bit. And, oh, by the way, it's for the rest of the year, right? And so the many teachers not able to see their students again, many teachers having to deal with their own health issues within their own families as a result of this. So, first and foremost, they got to take care of themselves. And then they also have to take care of themselves from a creative standpoint. And there have been, I think one of the great things that we learned over the past 3 months is the collaborative spirit of our educators. When everyone was thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool and said, you're teaching from home, and you set up the Facebook group that now has over 43,000 members, and I think within a week or two there was over 30,000. I mean, it was amazing. And whether it was your group or several other special interest groups around music that popped up, educators were coming in and helping each other. How do I do this? What's the best platform? What have you used? What did and the way that people were so giving of information and such a teacher helping teacher mentality, I thought was really incredible. And I think that's still we're still seeing that continue as people are struggling with what are our opening plans going to look like. And I think that we're going to need to rely on this as long as we're in this environment. And we're probably going to be in this environment until there's a vaccine. So we need to really focus on, what can we do to take care of ourselves? What can we do to take care of ourselves creatively as it relates to our ability to be effective in this environment? And also don't feel like they have to be a hero and that I'm going to do it myself, that I'm all alone, that there's nobody else that's in my situation. Well, there's tens of thousands of teachers that are in your situation and willing to reach out to you and help you and be there as a sounding post to offer suggestions and guidance and sometimes just listen.
Well, you touched on something that's so important, and that's the sense of community and support for each other. And I can't look over that group without getting a little teary-eyed at the kind of help that people are giving to each other. It's absolutely outstanding. I feel so privileged to be able to help facilitate that. But one of the things I see in the group more and more now is people expressing a desire to leave the profession, and because it's a challenge that they didn't sign up for. And unfortunately, they can be anywhere from having just started last year to having 20 years under their belt. What can we do to encourage music teachers to stay in the profession?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we are creating environments where they're going to be comfortable. I think a lot of the anxiety is, as you said, I didn't sign up for this. There's a lot of things in music education or in education period that we end up doing that we didn't sign up for. And I get that this is extraordinary, but, there are some teachers that actually, for health reasons, just don't feel like they will be safe. And you know what? I get it. If they're in a vulnerable population and they're there in that stage of their life and they feel that it's too risky for them from a health standpoint, maybe it is, maybe it is time to look at doing something else, or maybe they can volunteer to be a part of remote teams. Districts are going to have remote teams because there are going to be students that are going to refuse to come back to schools. And we're hearing that parents are saying, I'm just not sending my kid back. Well, there's got to be a way to provide instruction for them. But for others, I would I would hope that they would lean on the rest of us that are in the field, that know that, this is not easy. And I would never want to impose my ideas or thinking on somebody else, because I'm not in their shoes. And every situation is different. And the same, people are saying, why don't they just give us one way to reopen our schools? And the reason why they don't do that is because all of our schools are different. We have different configurations of buildings, different number of students that are in there, different communities that they're being served in, different circumstances that students are coming from, that all of that has to be taken into consideration as you're figuring out how to then, reopen the schools. So with an educator who is reluctant, I would first urge them to at least, you made it those 3 months, you made it through the first round. Now think how much more effective you can be, that you get time to plan for it, right? You didn't get to plan for last time. Again, it was deep end of the pool, go. Now at least you've learned to doggy paddle a little bit, and now we need to work on, maybe getting them to do, some more sophisticated strokes in the classroom. So, I would encourage them not to leave yet, because I do think that there is a lot of innovative opportunities in front of us, and they can be a part of that group of educators that are helping to innovate and reimagine how we can do great music instruction, regardless of whatever restrictions are put on this.
I've been reading this book called Limitless by Jim Quick, I think. Have you heard of this book? Mm-hmm. And he talks right at the beginning about the hero's journey. And you see it repeated so many times in all of the books and movies and stories that we love, is this hero's journey. It's somebody of average intelligence and average skills who has a challenge thrown at them, and then they find a mentor, and through the mentorship end up becoming this massive hero or superhero, right? So everybody from Luke Skywalker to Harry Potter to, and if we see ourselves as this hero's journey, right? That maybe last year, at the beginning of last school year, we were already awesome. Let's just admit that right from the start. But maybe we were a pretty average music teacher as far as things go. Well, now we get to choose. Are we going to take that hero's journey, accept the mentorship that we have, and seek that out? Luke Skywalker didn't have Ben Kenobi coming and knocking on his door. Luke went and found him, right?
Yep.
And through that mentorship, he became this very powerful hero. And we can become these incredibly powerful heroes if we adopt the mentorship and are willing to adjust and change ourselves, in which case we're fulfilling our original mission as teachers, which I think for most of us is to teach students to love music. And we can't, we have to kind of just push through and realize this is all going to pass. We're going to come out the other side of this. There will be a vaccine. There will be some adjustments. But 10 years from now, it'll be a blink of an eye. We might look at it as this amazingly transformative time, but we'll look back at it with, I think, nostalgia and joy and incredible gratitude that we were the ones who were able to be here in this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Well, I almost want to end right there, but but I still have a couple of more questions.
Sure.
Okay, really quick. Is anyone talking about paying teachers more? Because we're doing so much more work, and now we're going to have to do like twice as much work if we're going to have to social distance and everything. Is there any kind of positive compensation for us on the other side of this?
I haven't heard anything about that. But I also haven't heard them say we're going to pay you less, right? So I think that the game right now is to make sure that we can, keep our schools operating, and that we can provide high quality education for all of our students, that we can keep the promises that have been made to the teachers already regarding, income and health benefits and all of those things. But there is an economic, tsunami that is out there that, depending on how our policymakers decide to address it, will determine whether or not, we just have some bumps, in our system, or whether or not we hit some craters. And I think that's the thing that is the unknown right now is what's going to happen to education funding, what's going to happen as state tax revenues have been declining. What impact is that going to have not only on the current year, like the year, and I say current year, the 2021 school year that we're entering in right now, but how does that impact actually 21, 22? And because these tend to delay, the impact tends to delay by about a year. And it's like what we saw with the Great Recession. It was in 2009, 2010, but the real impact was in the 2010, 2011 school year. That's when we saw all the problems. And so it's really unknown where this is going to go. There's talk about federal money that will then help backfill the holes that some of the states have found themselves in. If that comes through, it's similar to what they did back during the Great Recession, then that can stabilize things. Without that, who knows what would happen. So I'm not hearing a lot of people talking about we've got more money to pay teachers more. What I hear them talking about now is, how am I going to pay for all this PPE that I have to have in my schools? And what was it? They said the average school district budget, they're going to spend about at least $1.7 million just on all the different protocol things, from temperature checks to masks to everything else that's involved with this. So yeah, like I said, it's complicated. No disagreement that our educators are working harder than ever, longer hours to be able to do what they're doing. I live with a middle school band director that's been running her program from our kitchen table, so very familiar with the challenges that they face. But I don't, no one's coming forward with their checkbook open right now to pay teachers more, even though they are worth it.
Yeah, absolutely worth it. Four times as much worth it, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about what the future will look like, or what it might look like, or what options we have to consider and what we can make it look like. But I want to wrap this up with, what do you think the future should look like?
Well, I think it should look like what I believe it will look like. And I think that we're in a tremendously innovative moment. Like we saw for the 3 months when we were teaching remotely, was very innovative, very creative strategies. And I think that as our educators become more comfortable with the new tools and ideas and the things that they've learned over the past 3 months, and begin to embed that into their programs, and as we find a way to bring our programs back, I think that there's going to be a tremendous burst of innovation in music education and arts education that will have a transformative effect on what music education looks like a decade from now. And I think that it's going to be celebrated for its diversity, for its creativity, for its imagination, and also for the way that it engages students to have a greater voice in what's happening. So I see, in my crystal ball, as foggy as it may be, I actually see us on the verge of a new renaissance for arts education in this country.
I think renaissance is the perfect word for it. All we have to do is make it through these dark ages, and we will get to be the artists and the teachers who usher in the new era.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bob, so much for your time. I genuinely appreciate it. I know we're both incredibly busy right now, but it's such a joy to just be able to spend this time just talking with you and just let me express from everybody I know the massive appreciation for everything that you're doing right now. And I hope you know that you can always reach out to me if there's anything I can do for you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
My friends, I know we covered a lot of ground in this episode. I know we're faced with a crazy, unpredictable, and potentially terrifying future. But I promise you, years from now, we will look back on this time and recognize it for the formative experience that it is. This is a time of our renaissance. This is a time of revolution. To quote Hamilton the musical, look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening. I'm so grateful to be able to be a part of it with you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know how valuable your time is. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And if you'd like to leave any comments about what you think the future of music education should hold, leave them on the show notes page, smartmusic.com/blog. Search for episode 77. Until next time, my friend, keep teaching on.